Night falls over a quiet American suburb, neat rows of houses, front lawns still glowing faintly under the pale streetlights. Behind each door lies a family, holding on to a version of the American dream passed down from generations before. A dream of stability, of comfort, of security. But what if that dream is no longer real? What if the middle class itself, the backbone of America's identity, is slowly vanishing before our very eyes? Listen closely, the signs are everywhere. Empty storefronts on once bustling main streets. Families forced to juggle 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Credit cards stacked on kitchen counters like fragile towers, ready to collapse at any moment. And yet, in boardrooms and on television screens, the promise still lingers, that hard work, education, and perseverance will guarantee a better life. But beneath the surface, something darker has been unfolding for decades, a hidden truth that challenges everything we thought we knew about prosperity in America. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos. And drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. We'd love to see where our viewers are tuning in from. Because this story is not just history, it's happening right now. And by the time the last page of this chapter is revealed, you may realize the America we grew up believing in may already be gone. The story of America's middle class does not begin with its fall, it begins with its rise. For decades, the middle class was more than just an income bracket, it was a cultural identity, a promise that ordinary people could live with dignity, security, and hope. But tonight, we begin with the quiet unraveling. A slow erosion so subtle, many never saw it coming until it was too late. Picture the 1970s, the hum of factory floors in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland. The rhythmic clang of steel presses, the endless flow of assembly lines. Millions of Americans worked these jobs, building cars, machinery, and the infrastructure of a nation. The work was hard, but the reward was steady, a paycheck strong enough to afford a home, a car, and the possibility of sending children to college. It was not wealth, but it was stability. That stability was the essence of the middle class. And yet, as the decades unfolded, something began to shift. Slowly at first, then with accelerating force. Wages that once grew in step with productivity began to stall. Factories closed their doors, replaced not with new opportunities, but with silence. Towns that had once thrived on industry began to hollow out. Families who once lived with confidence now lived with uncertainty. Historians call it the Great Divergence. Between 1945 and 1973, American wages and productivity grew together. If you worked harder, the economy rewarded you. But after the mid-1970s, a fracture appeared. Productivity continued to climb, but wages stagnated. The wealth created at the top did not trickle down, it pooled upward, building a gap that would stretch wider and wider with each passing year. The erosion was invisible to some. On the surface, many families still lived in homes, still drove cars, still gathered around dinner tables. But beneath that surface, cracks spread. Job security weakened. Healthcare costs crept higher. Pensions that once promised retirement comfort disappeared, replaced by 401(k)s tied to volatile markets. Debt began to seep into everyday life, not as an emergency measure, but as a constant presence. Psychologists studying this era found something remarkable. The stress of financial instability did not always announce itself with loud panic, it seeped into daily routines like background noise. Families smiled for photographs, but beneath the smiles were sleepless nights. Couples argued over bills, but often in whispers, trying to shield children from the fear. The middle class was not collapsing all at once, it was eroding silently, like a shoreline slowly claimed by the tide. The erosion touched not just wallets, but identities. In America, being middle class was more than just income, it was dignity. It was the pride of being able to provide. When that pride was threatened, the loss cut deeper than numbers on a bank statement. It reshaped self-worth, community, and belief in the future. But why did it happen? To understand the fall, we must return to the forces that once built the middle class. After World War II, the United States stood unmatched. Its factories were untouched by war. Its economy surged, fueled by demand both domestic and global. The GI Bill provided education and housing for millions of veterans, expanding opportunity. Strong unions secured wages and benefits that lifted entire communities. It was, for many, the golden age of the middle class. And yet, even in that golden age, the seeds of erosion were planted. Globalization, automation, and the rise of financialization were not yet visible, but they were on the horizon. Political choices shifted the balance of power from labor to capital. Tax structures began to change. Deregulation opened new opportunities for the wealthy, but new vulnerabilities for workers. The middle class did not vanish overnight, it was slowly unbuilt. Brick by brick, promise by promise, it was dismantled. And while some families rose into affluence, far more slipped downward, into a place of constant precarity. By the 1990s, surveys showed something chilling. Fewer Americans identified themselves as middle class. For the first time, the dream that had defined generations was slipping from reach. And yet, the illusion persisted. Suburbs expanded, malls thrived, credit cards allowed lifestyles to appear stable. But beneath the surface, the erosion deepened. Imagine a family in Ohio in 1995. The father, once employed at a factory, now drives delivery trucks with long hours and no benefits. The mother works part-time in retail, her shifts unpredictable. Their children still attend school, still dream of college, but tuition has risen sharply. Bills arrive in the mail like waves hitting the shore. They manage, but only just. They tell themselves they are middle class, but in truth, they are balancing on the edge. And this is the hidden truth. The middle class did not vanish in a single collapse, it has been vanishing in silence, slowly, invisibly, until one day we looked around and realized, the America we thought we lived in was no longer there. The question is, what comes next? Because the erosion was only the beginning. What followed would expose not just cracks in the foundation, but the unraveling of the dream itself. The image of America's middle class was not born in silence. It roared into being in the years after World War II, when soldiers returned home to a nation bursting with energy, when factories produced not weapons but consumer goods, when highways stretched like arteries across the land. For the first time in human history, a working-class family could aspire to more than survival. They could aspire to comfort. They could aspire to dignity. They could aspire to the American dream. Picture the 1950s, a black and white television glowing in the corner of a living room. Children gathered around the set, watching the first images of Disneyland, space rockets, or cowboy shows. Outside, the smell of freshly cut grass. Driveways lined with Chevrolets. Mothers and fathers dressed for Sunday church. The promise was simple: if you worked hard, the future would be better than the past. This was the golden age of the middle class. A time when union jobs offered wages that could support a family on a single income. A time when pensions promised a secure retirement. A time when the cost of college was low enough that it felt like a gateway, not a trap. Historians call this the Great Compression, the era when the gap between rich and poor narrowed, when prosperity was more widely shared. Incomes rose across the board. Tax rates on the wealthiest Americans were far higher than today, sometimes above 90%, and yet the economy thrived. The rich remained rich, but the rest of the country rose alongside them. And perhaps most importantly, there was hope. Surveys in the 1950s and 60s revealed an optimism that feels almost alien today. The majority of Americans believed the next generation would live better than their own. The dream was alive, not as myth, but as reality. But even in this golden age, shadows lingered. Not everyone shared equally in the prosperity. African American families, despite their service in the war, were often denied mortgages through redlining policies. Women, though entering the workforce in growing numbers, still faced barriers to equal pay and opportunity. Rural communities often lagged behind the booming suburbs. The golden age was real, but it was not universal. And yet, for those who lived it, it felt unshakable. The idea that this prosperity could fade seemed unthinkable. Factories roared with life. Suburbs spread outward like rings in water. Even in moments of political turmoil, civil rights marches, Vietnam protests, cultural revolutions, the economy felt solid, like bedrock. But beneath the optimism, tectonic plates were shifting. In the late 1960s and 70s, the world began to change. Global competition rose. Countries that had once been devastated by war, Japan, Germany, South Korea, rebuilt their industries, becoming economic rivals. Oil shocks rattled the economy, sending waves of inflation through American households. Automation began to whisper its arrival, machines replacing tasks once done by human hands. The golden age began to fade not with a bang, but with whispers, with subtle changes that most families didn't recognize until they were deep within them. Take, for example, the story of Flint, Michigan. Once a jewel of American manufacturing, home to General Motors plants that provided tens of thousands of steady jobs. In the 1950s and 60s, Flint was a city of promise. Families thrived, neighborhoods flourished, schools were well funded. But as the decades shifted, cracks appeared. Jobs moved overseas. Plants closed. Wages froze. By the 1980s, Flint was no longer a symbol of prosperity, it was a symbol of decline. What happened in Flint happened across the nation. From Pittsburgh's steel mills to Ohio's rubber plants, from textile factories in the Carolinas to shipyards in California. Town after town watched its lifeblood drain away. Economists mark this as the moment the middle class began its long descent. Incomes stopped rising as they once had. Job security vanished. Benefits that were once guaranteed became negotiable, or disappeared altogether. Families could no longer rely on a single paycheck. 2 incomes became necessary, then 3 jobs, then side hustles. The dream of stability became harder to hold. Psychologically, this shift was profound. For decades, Americans had believed in a covenant: work hard, and you will be rewarded. But as the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, that covenant was broken. Families worked just as hard, sometimes harder, but the rewards slipped further away. This fracture reshaped culture itself. Advertising told families they could still have it all: the home, the car, the vacations, but increasingly, those dreams were financed not by wages, but by debt. Credit cards, once rare, became household staples. Borrowing filled the gap that wages no longer covered. And so, the golden age faded quietly into memory. For older generations, it became a story told with nostalgia, about a time when one job was enough, when pensions were secure, when college was affordable. For younger generations, it became a myth, something they heard about, but never truly experienced. But here lies the hidden truth: the fading of the golden age was not inevitable. It was not destiny. It was the result of choices, political, economic, cultural. Choices that favored the few at the expense of the many. Choices that restructured America's economy in ways that made the middle class increasingly fragile. As we move forward in this story, we must ask, what happens when the foundation of a society begins to crack? What happens when the dream that once united millions becomes a memory, a ghost of a promise? Because if the golden age was the height of the middle class, what came after was a slow descent into something darker. In the chapters to come, we will follow the lives of families caught in this shift. Families who worked, who believed, who tried to hold on, only to find the ground shifting beneath their feet. Their struggles are not isolated stories. They are the story of America itself. The golden age has faded. What remains is a nation searching for the dream it once thought was unbreakable. And the next chapter reveals the cost of that search, the rise of debt, and how it became not just a burden, but a way of life. Night. A kitchen table. A single lamp glowing above stacks of paper. Credit card bills, medical statements, mortgage notices. A husband and wife sit quietly, pens in hand, calculators beside them, the silence heavy except for the soft scratch of numbers on paper. This scene, repeated in millions of homes across America, tells a hidden truth. Debt has become not an exception, not an emergency, but a way of life. The middle class once thrived on wages. Today, it survives on borrowing. But how did this happen? How did a nation that once prided itself on self-reliance, on hard-earned paychecks and steady savings, become a country where families live paycheck to paycheck, credit to credit, debt to debt? The story begins in the late 20th century. As wages stagnated, as the golden age faded, families faced a cruel dilemma: lower their standard of living, or find another way to keep up. For most, the answer came wrapped in shiny plastic. The credit card. At first, credit was a symbol of trust. A bank's belief that you were good for your word. But in time, it became something more insidious. It became the substitute for a paycheck that no longer stretched far enough. Groceries, gas, school supplies, even medical bills, things once covered by wages, now quietly migrated onto credit. By the 1980s, banks realized something extraordinary. Debt itself could be profitable. The interest rates, the fees, the penalties, they turned ordinary families into streams of revenue. What was once a lifeline became a trap. And so, credit expanded. Mailboxes filled with offers. Pre-approved cards arrived before teenagers even finished high school. America was being taught a new language: minimum payments, late fees, compounding interest. Sociologists began to notice a shift in culture. Debt was no longer a mark of failure, it was normalized. A house with a mortgage, a car with a loan, a lifestyle financed by credit. To be middle class in America was to be indebted. The very definition of stability had been rewritten. But the consequences were profound. Studies revealed that debt carried not only financial weight but psychological weight. Families in debt reported higher levels of anxiety, depression, even physical illness. Couples argued more. Parents felt guilt when they couldn't provide without borrowing. Debt seeped into the soul of the middle class, reshaping relationships, reshaping communities. And then, in the 2000s, came the most devastating chapter: the housing bubble. Banks and lenders, no longer satisfied with credit cards, turned their attention to the American home. Mortgages were packaged, sold, and resold, transforming neighborhoods into investment vehicles. Families were told they could afford houses far beyond their means. Suburbs swelled with new construction, new dreams, new debts. But dreams built on sand collapsed quickly. When the housing market crashed in 2008, millions of families lost everything. Foreclosures spread like a disease. Entire neighborhoods stood hollow, their windows boarded, their lawns overgrown. The middle class, already fragile, was dealt a devastating blow. Even today, the scars remain. A generation of families who watched their savings vanish, their homes seized, their futures rewritten. A generation that learned debt is not just a number, it is a chain. But debt did not end with mortgages. Student loans rose like a tide. Medical bills mounted with every hospital visit. Car loans stretched longer, sometimes 7 years or more. Debt became a permanent companion, an invisible roommate at every dinner table. Consider this haunting statistic: by the early 2020s, total household debt in America surpassed $17 trillion. That number is almost incomprehensible. But behind it are human stories. Stories of parents taking out loans to pay for a child's education, only to see both parent and child drowning in repayments. Stories of families forced to choose between paying a medical bill or keeping the electricity on. Stories of retirees living not on pensions, but on credit, hoping the debt outlives them. Psychologists describe debt as a slow-burning trauma. It does not explode like sudden catastrophe, it lingers. It follows families to bed, into their dreams. It whispers in the background of daily life, a constant reminder of vulnerability. And in America, that whisper has become a chorus. But why did it become this way? Why did a nation once defined by its prosperity embrace a system that thrives on keeping its citizens indebted? The answer lies in policy and profit. Over the decades, financial deregulation allowed banks to expand their reach. Interest rates, once capped, soared. Bankruptcy protections weakened. The system shifted to favor lenders over borrowers. And behind it all, a culture of consumption told families they needed more: bigger homes, newer cars, endless goods. The American dream was no longer just about stability, it was about display. And display was expensive. Debt became the bridge between desire and reality. But bridges built on loans do not last forever. They crack, they buckle, and eventually, they collapse. The middle class learned this lesson painfully in 2008. But even after the crash, even after the devastation, debt continued to grow. Families rebuilt not with savings, but with more borrowing. It had become the oxygen of the economy. Without debt, the system would suffocate. This is the hidden truth: debt is not just a personal problem, it is the engine of the modern American economy. Banks profit from it. Corporations depend on it. Even the government thrives on it. And so, the middle class is trapped in a paradox. To live without debt is nearly impossible. To live with it is a constant struggle. And so, the scene returns to that kitchen table, to the lamp glowing over bills. A mother staring at numbers that do not add up. A father rubbing his temples in silence. Children in the next room, unaware of the storm gathering in their future. This is the portrait of the middle class today. Not prosperity, not stability, but survival through debt. But survival has a cost. And in the next chapter, we uncover what that cost truly is, the hidden price of chasing dreams that have grown more expensive, and more elusive, with every passing year. A young couple stands outside a home, their faces lit with hope. A "for sale" sign sways gently in the front yard. They imagine children playing on the lawn, holidays in the living room, laughter echoing down the hallways. The realtor smiles, the papers are ready. But behind the dream, hides the cost. A cost that is far greater than numbers on a page. A cost that has reshaped the very fabric of America's middle class. Dreams are not free. In America, they never have been. The dream of education, of homeownership, of a secure retirement, all carry a price. But in the past, that price was attainable. College tuition could be paid with part-time work. A modest home cost 2 or 3 years of income. Retirement was guaranteed by pensions. The dream was real, because the cost was within reach. Today, that cost has exploded beyond imagination. Consider education. In 1970, the average cost of tuition at a public university was less than $500 a year. Adjusted for inflation, about $3,500 today. By the 2020s, that number had ballooned to more than $10,000 a year for public colleges, and far more for private ones. Student loans, once a rare burden, became a rite of passage. Entire generations began adulthood already in chains, owing tens of thousands before earning their first paycheck. And the impact was not just financial. Studies show that student debt delays marriage, delays homeownership, delays family formation. Young adults, instead of building lives, spend their 20s and 30s digging out of holes. The dream of education, once a ladder to the middle class, has become a weight dragging it down. Now turn to housing. Homeownership was once the cornerstone of the American dream. It symbolized stability, investment, belonging. In the 1950s and 60s, a single breadwinner could afford a modest home. By the 2000s, prices soared so high that two incomes were barely enough. In cities like San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, even middle-class professionals found ownership slipping out of reach. Renting became the default, ownership a distant fantasy. And those who did buy often found themselves trapped in mortgages that stretched for decades, their monthly payments consuming half their income. One missed paycheck, one medical emergency, one economic downturn, and the dream could vanish overnight. Retirement, too, has changed. Pensions that guaranteed security have disappeared. In their place are 401k plans tied to the stock market, leaving workers vulnerable to forces far beyond their control. A market crash can erase years of savings in weeks. Surveys reveal that nearly half of Americans have no retirement savings at all. For many, the dream of resting after decades of work is gone. They will work until their bodies give out. The cost of dreams has become the trap of debt. And yet, despite this, the culture of aspiration remains relentless. Advertisements still promise the perfect home, the perfect car, the perfect lifestyle. Social media displays endless images of luxury, of success, of curated perfection. Families compare themselves not to their neighbors, but to celebrities and influencers. The pressure to keep up is immense. Anthropologists studying American culture describe it as a society of performance. To be middle class is not just to earn, it is to appear. Appear stable, appear successful, appear secure. Even if behind the curtain, bills pile high, savings dwindle, and anxiety gnaws at the edges of every decision. But what happens when a society builds its identity on dreams that are increasingly unattainable? The answer is disillusionment. Surveys reveal a steady decline in faith in the American dream. Younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, are far less likely to believe they will live better than their parents. For the first time in modern history, the dream feels broken. This disillusionment carries consequences. It erodes trust in institutions, in government, in the economy itself. It fosters resentment, division, anger. And it reshapes politics, driving movements fueled by the sense that the system no longer works, that the dream has been stolen. But beyond politics, the emotional toll is devastating. Imagine a family, 2 children, both parents working full-time. They do everything right. They budget, they save, they sacrifice. And yet, the cost of childcare rivals a mortgage. The cost of healthcare drains their savings. College for their children looms like a mountain they will never climb. They feel trapped in a race they cannot win. They feel the dream slipping through their fingers, no matter how hard they try. This is not failure. This is the system itself. A system that shifted the cost of dreams from society to individuals, from shared prosperity to personal struggle. A system that asks families to bear burdens they were never meant to carry alone. And yet, the pursuit continues. Because the dream is powerful. Even broken, it compels. Families still stretch for it, still sacrifice for it, still believe in it, because to give up the dream is to give up hope. But hope has a price. And the price has grown too high. In the next chapter, we travel to the heart of this story, the suburbs. Once the symbol of middle-class victory, now the stage where illusions and realities collide. Behind manicured lawns and white picket fences, a new truth waits to be revealed. At dawn, the cul-de-sac is quiet. Lawns trimmed with precision, driveways lined with minivans and SUVs. A paper rests on each doorstep, sprinklers hiss softly, and behind each door a family prepares for another day. On the surface, it looks like the picture of success, the postcard image of the American middle class. But appearances can deceive. Behind the fresh paint, behind the smiling holiday photos, behind the curtain of suburban calm, lies a truth far more complicated. The suburbs, once the crown jewel of the American dream, have become a stage for illusions. In the years after World War II, suburbs symbolized arrival. The GI Bill made mortgages affordable, highways connected city jobs to suburban homes, and developers like William Levitt mass-produced neighborhoods where ordinary families could own a slice of paradise. The dream was simple: a house, a yard, safety for children, community with neighbors. It was the physical embodiment of middle-class identity. But as the decades passed, the illusion began to fracture. First came the financial strain. Homes in suburbs were marketed not just as shelters, but as investments. Property values became a kind of currency, a family's wealth tied to rising prices. But when markets dipped, families found themselves trapped in mortgages larger than the value of their homes. A dream asset turned into a financial anchor. Then came the social pressures. Anthropologists note that suburbia fostered a culture of comparison. The larger house, the newer car, the better lawn, all became markers of success. To fall behind was not merely financial, it was social. Families stretched budgets to keep up appearances, to maintain the illusion of comfort, even as debt piled high. And behind the manicured lawns, isolation grew. Suburbs promised community, but distance and design often fostered loneliness. Long commutes left little time for neighbors, for family, for rest. The very layout of suburban life, sprawling, car-dependent, segregated, began to erode the sense of connection it once promised. Psychologists studying suburban life describe a quiet epidemic of stress. Parents racing to balance work and family. Children pressured to excel in schools that demanded more while offering less. The stress was hidden, tucked behind tidy doors, unspoken in neighborhood gatherings. Suburbs looked peaceful, but beneath the surface, anxiety pulsed. And then, in the 2000s, came the housing crash. Suburban streets, once filled with life, saw foreclosure signs bloom like weeds. Families packed belongings into boxes, vanished overnight, leaving empty houses as silent witnesses. The illusion shattered. Suburbs were not invincible, they were fragile. Entire communities learned that their dream homes could vanish in an instant. But the illusion did not die. Even after the crash, the marketing returned. Suburbs were still sold as havens, as proof of stability. Families, desperate for security, returned to the promise, even knowing its fragility. The cycle repeated: buy, borrow, hope, collapse. And yet, there is something haunting about the persistence of the illusion. Because to abandon it would be to abandon the dream itself. The house with the yard, the family gathered at the table, the promise of a better tomorrow, it still exerts a powerful pull. Even as costs rise, even as risks mount, families still chase it. Sociologists call this the myth of the middle-class suburb. It is not merely a place, it is an identity. To say you live in a suburb is to say you made it, even if making it means working 2 jobs, juggling debts, and living in constant uncertainty. The illusion is powerful because it hides the truth that many families are one crisis away from collapse. Imagine a mother standing at the kitchen window of her suburban home. She looks out at the street where children ride bicycles, where neighbors wave from driveways. She smiles, but behind her, on the counter, lies a stack of overdue bills. The house is beautiful, the life looks perfect, but the pressure is unbearable. This is the hidden story of the suburbs. And yet, illusions are not harmless. They shape expectations, they fuel decisions, they mask struggles. By clinging to the illusion, families are pushed deeper into debt, deeper into exhaustion, deeper into quiet despair. The suburbs were built as sanctuaries. Today, for many, they are cages. But this story is larger than individual families. It is the story of a nation clinging to appearances while ignoring truths. The middle class presents a face of stability, but beneath it lies fragility, fear, and a constant fight to stay afloat. And this fragility is not evenly shared. Suburbs have long been marked by exclusion, by race, by class, by opportunity. Redlining, restrictive covenants, unequal schools, all ensured that the dream was not accessible to everyone. Even today, the illusion of suburban equality hides deep divides. As the sun sets over the cul-de-sac, the houses glow warmly, like lanterns in the dark. But inside, families sit with worries too heavy to share. They smile for photos, wave to neighbors, mow their lawns. They keep the illusion alive, because to reveal the truth would be to admit how fragile the dream has become. This is the hidden cost of the suburbs, not just financial, but emotional. A landscape built to embody success has become a theater of illusions. And while families maintain the performance, outside forces continue to shift the stage. Factories close, jobs vanish, industries relocate. The very towns that once fed the suburbs begin to hollow out. In the next chapter, we leave the cul-de-sacs behind and travel to those forgotten places, the factory towns that once built America, and the silence they left behind. The camera drifts over rusting steel beams, shattered windows, weeds pushing through cracked concrete. Silence fills the air where once there was thunder, the thunder of machines, the voices of workers, the rhythm of industry. This is the story of America's factory towns, the beating heart of the middle class, towns that vanished, leaving ghosts in their place. For decades, these towns were the engines of American life. Detroit with its automobiles, Pittsburgh with its steel, Flint with its assembly lines, Akron with its rubber. Each town a universe of labor, community, and pride. The factories were not just buildings, they were lifelines. They paid wages that could support families, buy homes, send children to school. They created not just jobs, but identities. In the 1950s and 60s, to work in a factory was not shame, it was honor. A worker in Detroit could stand at an assembly line, tightening bolts on a Chevrolet, and know his labor was part of something larger. The car that rolled off the line was not just a product, it was a piece of America. The factory gave him a paycheck, health benefits, a pension. It gave him the dignity of knowing his children would live better than he did. But starting in the late 20th century, a slow unraveling began. Globalization shifted jobs overseas. Companies discovered they could pay foreign workers a fraction of American wages. Automation replaced human hands with machines that never tired, never demanded raises, never unionized. One by one, factories closed their doors. The impact was seismic. Entire towns that had thrived for generations collapsed almost overnight. Families who had worked in the same plants for decades found themselves unemployed, their skills no longer valued. Homes were abandoned, schools underfunded, businesses shuttered. What was once pride became despair. Sociologists call these communities the Rust Belt, a phrase that carries both geography and tragedy. Stretching across the Midwest and Northeast, these towns became symbols of decline. Unemployment soared, poverty deepened, drug addiction spread. Once vibrant communities turned into landscapes of decay. But numbers alone cannot capture the loss. Imagine a father who worked 20 years at a steel mill in Pennsylvania. He wakes one morning to learn the plant is closing. His pension is gone, his benefits cut. At 50 years old, his skills are obsolete. He applies for jobs at Walmart, at fast food chains, but nothing compares to what he once earned. He looks at his children and wonders how to tell them the future he promised no longer exists. This is not just economics, it is identity. Factory work gave meaning, community, pride. Its loss created more than poverty, it created emptiness. Sociologists studying these towns describe a sense of collective grief. A grief not only for jobs lost, but for futures erased. The ripple effect stretched far beyond the towns themselves. As factories closed, the suburbs they once supported began to weaken. Tax bases shrank, schools declined, infrastructure crumbled. The collapse of factory towns was not isolated, it was contagious, spreading instability across entire regions. And yet, the story is often hidden. National leaders spoke of progress, of technological innovation, of globalization as inevitable. But for the families left behind, the words felt like betrayal. Progress for whom? Innovation for what? Globalization for whose benefit? The anger born in these towns reshaped politics. Disillusioned workers turned against parties that once claimed to protect them. Movements rose, fueled by resentment, by the belief that the system no longer cared. The vanishing of factory towns was not only an economic event, it was a political earthquake. But beyond politics, there is the human toll. Walk through Gary, Indiana, once a thriving steel city. Today, its downtown is a skeleton, its population half of what it once was. Schools closed, crime rose, hope fled. Or Flint, Michigan, where not only jobs vanished, but even the water turned poisonous, a symbol of neglect so stark it became international news. The vanishing of factory towns is a story of betrayal. A nation that once promised prosperity to its workers turned its back, choosing profit over people. And the middle class, once built on these towns, found itself unmoored. Anthropologists compare it to the fall of ancient civilizations. Rome had its aqueducts, its legions, its forums. America had its factories, its assembly lines, its industrial towns. And just as Rome's ruins stand as reminders of what was lost, so too do the rusting shells of factories remind us of a dream that once was real, and is now gone. But what replaces the factory town? In many places, nothing. Jobs vanish, populations shrink, despair lingers. In others, low-wage service jobs emerge, part-time retail, gig work, delivery driving. Work that pays far less, offers no benefits, provides no dignity. Work that cannot rebuild a middle class. And so, families adapt. Some leave, seeking opportunity elsewhere. Others stay, clinging to fading communities. But in either case, the middle class built on factories has vanished. The foundation cracked, the dream collapsed. This vanishing is not just history, it is ongoing. Every year, new industries automate, new jobs move overseas, new towns hollow out. The story of vanishing factory towns is not a chapter closed, it is a chapter still being written. As the camera lingers on the ruins of an abandoned plant, the silence is heavy. This is not just a building, it is a monument to what was lost. The hum of machines, the laughter of workers, the pride of a paycheck, all gone. But if the factory town was the cradle of the middle class, its collapse reveals something deeper, that the middle class itself is fragile, vulnerable, impermanent. A dream that can be unbuilt as easily as it was built. And in the absence of factories, a new force rose to take their place. Not steel, not cars, not rubber, but credit, finance, and speculation. The middle class no longer built its future with hands, it borrowed it from banks. In the next chapter, we uncover this shift, the rise of credit, and the collapse of security. A transformation that would forever change what it meant to be American, and what it meant to be middle class. The screen opens with a close-up of a thin, rectangular object, plastic, shiny, embossed with numbers. A credit card. To some, it feels harmless, a convenience. But to millions of Americans, it is a lifeline, and a trap. In the ruins of the factory town, something new took shape. Where paychecks shrank and pensions vanished, credit filled the void. If wages could no longer cover the cost of living, banks offered another path: borrow today, pay tomorrow. And so, quietly, the very foundation of the middle class shifted, from earned security, to borrowed survival. The promise of credit was intoxicating. The first credit cards in the 1950s were marketed as keys to freedom. Diners Club, American Express, then Visa and MasterCard. At first, they were symbols of status, carried by the wealthy, used in upscale restaurants or hotels. But by the 1980s and 90s, credit had spread to everyone. The dream of the middle class no longer required a factory job or a pension, it required only a line of credit. Banks framed it as empowerment. Buy now, pay later. Commercials showed smiling families, shopping carts overflowing, vacations booked, homes furnished. But beneath the glossy images lay a darker truth. Credit was not empowerment, it was dependency. It was chains disguised as wings. By the 2000s, the average American household carried multiple credit cards. Debt became normalized, expected, unavoidable. To live in America was to owe. Debt for cars, debt for homes, debt for college, debt for medical bills. The middle class, once defined by ownership, became defined by obligation. But why did this happen? Why did credit rise so fast, so deep? The answer lies in the collapse of wages and security. As real wages stagnated after the 1970s, families turned to borrowing to maintain the lifestyle their parents once afforded with a single income. Where the factory paycheck once supported a home, now it required two incomes, and still, it was not enough. Credit became the bridge. Yet the bridge was fragile. Interest rates piled on, late fees mounted, balances grew. Debt turned into a trap, a labyrinth with no exit. What began as survival turned into lifelong servitude. Consider a young couple in Ohio in the early 1990s. Both work full-time, but their wages barely cover rent and groceries. They want their children to have Christmas gifts, a vacation, maybe a college fund. The answer seems simple: a credit card. At first, it feels like magic, the ability to buy without waiting. But as months pass, balances grow. Payments rise. Soon, the couple spends more on interest than on food. They are not climbing the ladder, they are sinking. Psychologists describe this as debt stress. It corrodes not only finances, but health, relationships, identity. Studies link debt to higher rates of depression, anxiety, even suicide. Debt creates shame, silence, secrecy. It is not just numbers on a statement, it is weight on the soul. But there is another layer: the system was designed this way. Credit companies profit not when people pay off balances, but when they cannot. The ideal customer is not the one who pays in full, but the one who struggles, endlessly, with revolving debt. In the shadows of Wall Street, debt is not tragedy, it is profit. The collapse of security became the rise of finance. As pensions disappeared, 401(k)s emerged, shifting risk from employers to workers. As wages stagnated, credit cards filled the gap. As medical costs soared, loans became lifelines. The system transformed the middle class from stable earners into perpetual borrowers. And yet, society encouraged it. To be creditworthy became a badge of honor. FICO scores replaced reputations. A number determined whether you could buy a home, rent an apartment, even get a job. Credit became not just financial, it became personal, social, moral. To be in debt was no longer shameful, it was American. But the collapse was always lurking. In 2008, the housing market imploded. Families who had borrowed to chase the dream of homeownership suddenly found themselves underwater, owing more than their homes were worth. The illusion shattered. Foreclosures swept across neighborhoods. Millions lost everything. And still, even after the crash, credit did not disappear, it expanded. Student loans ballooned, exceeding $1 trillion. Medical debt spread like a plague, ensnaring even the insured. Payday loans preyed on the desperate, charging interest rates so high they ensured poverty became permanent. This was no accident. It was the new architecture of the middle class. A structure not of steel and labor, but of debt and obligation. A structure where the future was always mortgaged, where freedom was always borrowed. And yet, many did not see it. The commercials still played. The banks still smiled. Credit was painted as opportunity, as freedom, as hope. But beneath the surface, the middle class was sinking, its security eroded, its independence compromised. Sociologists warn that this shift has altered the very psychology of America. The middle class once imagined the future as a reward for hard work. Now, it is imagined as something bought in advance, always fragile, always uncertain. The sense of stability, of permanence, is gone. And what does this mean for the generations to come? Children grow up in homes where debt is normal, where stress is constant, where the future is always fragile. They inherit not wealth, but worry. Not security, but struggle. The rise of credit was not just financial, it was cultural, existential. It reshaped what it meant to be middle class. No longer builders of stability, Americans became jugglers of debt, walking a tightrope stretched over an abyss. And beneath it all lies the question, what happens when the rope finally snaps? Because if the middle class is built not on wages, not on pensions, not on security, but on borrowed time, then its collapse is not a possibility. It is inevitable. In the next chapter, we explore the human cost of this collapse. Not just in numbers, not just in debt, but in lives unraveled. Families torn apart, futures erased, identities broken. The hidden scars of a vanishing middle class. A flicker of light. A family kitchen, dim, silent. A stack of unopened envelopes sits on the counter. Each one stamped with red ink, past due. A mother stands by the sink, her face pale, her hands trembling. In the other room, her children laugh at a cartoon on television. She forces a smile when she walks in, but inside, she is unraveling. This is the hidden America. Not the skyscrapers of Manhattan. Not the glittering suburbs of promise. But the living rooms where dreams quietly collapse, where debt poisons not just bank accounts, but marriages, friendships, even identities. The vanishing middle class is not only an economic crisis. It is a human one. For decades, researchers have traced the impact of financial decline on the American family. The findings are chilling. Rising debt and falling security are directly linked to higher rates of depression, substance abuse, domestic conflict, even suicide. Money does not just buy comfort, it buys peace of mind. And when it disappears, the fallout is personal, intimate, devastating. Consider marriage. In survey after survey, financial stress is cited as the #1 cause of divorce. Couples who once promised, for better or worse, often find that worse comes not from betrayal or distance, but from unpaid bills. Arguments begin with whispers, escalate to shouting, and often end in silence, the silence of separation. But it is not only marriages that collapse. Children bear the weight, too. Psychologists warn that growing up in a financially unstable home rewires the brain. Chronic stress in childhood is linked to anxiety, difficulty learning, even long-term health problems. A child who sees eviction notices, who watches parents cry over money, carries scars invisible but lasting. The American dream was supposed to give children a better life than their parents. But for many families, the dream has reversed. Parents fear handing down not wealth, but worry. Not homes, but debt. Not confidence, but uncertainty. There are stories across the nation. In California, a man works 3 jobs, 2 during the day, 1 at night, just to pay for rent and groceries. His daughter rarely sees him. She tells her teacher she wants to be rich, not to travel the world, not to buy a car, but simply so daddy can sleep. In West Virginia, a once proud factory worker, laid off in his 50s, spends months searching for work. Each rejection chips away at his pride. One night, overwhelmed by the weight of bills and the shame of failure, he ends his life. His obituary never mentions the word debt. His family never speaks of it again. In Florida, a single mother takes out payday loans to cover school supplies for her children. The interest buries her deeper each month. Her credit score plummets, her stress soars. She begins to feel trapped in a cycle she cannot escape. She tells a reporter, "I thought I was giving my kids a future. I think I just gave them my prison." These stories are not rare, they are common. Yet they are rarely told. Financial struggle is cloaked in silence. Americans are taught to smile, to endure, to keep their pain behind closed doors. But the cost is visible in statistics: rising mental illness, declining health, broken communities. Sociologists describe this as the erosion of dignity. The middle class once meant pride, the ability to provide, to own, to stand tall. Now, millions feel stripped of that dignity, reduced to numbers, judged by credit scores, haunted by bills. Dignity replaced with shame. And the shame is corrosive. Families hide their struggles from neighbors, from friends, even from each other. A father who loses his job may pretend he is still working, driving aimlessly during the day. A mother may secretly visit food banks while telling her children dinner is late because she was cooking something special. Silence becomes a survival strategy, but it only deepens the wound. The human cost is also communal. As the middle class weakens, communities fracture. Local shops close. Schools lose funding. Churches see fewer donations. Neighborhoods once filled with block parties and barbecues now feel hollow, brittle. A sense of belonging fades, replaced with isolation. And yet, in this darkness, there are flickers of resilience. Families find ways to stretch every dollar. Communities build informal support networks, childcare swaps, shared meals, collective fundraising. The human spirit resists, even when crushed by financial weight. But resistance is not the same as recovery. Survival is not the same as thriving. Historians warn that this cycle mirrors other societies where inequality grew unchecked. Rome, before its collapse. France, before its revolution. When the middle collapses, the entire structure wobbles. The burden is not only economic, it is cultural, moral, existential. Because the middle class is not just about money. It is about identity. To be middle class has long meant more than income. It meant stability, respectability, dignity. When that erodes, people do not just lose wealth, they lose themselves. And this loss is felt not in headlines, but in kitchens. In bedrooms. In children's drawings taped to refrigerators that will soon be repossessed. In birthday candles blown out over store-brand cupcakes, with parents smiling as if nothing is wrong. The vanishing dream leaves behind not just empty wallets, but broken hearts. Not just unpaid bills, but unspoken grief. The question now lingers: how long can a nation survive, when its backbone is breaking? As the middle class disappears, as families unravel, as silence deepens, what rises to take its place? The answer lies in the shadows of inequality, where wealth pools at the top, and despair spreads at the bottom. That is where we turn next. From above, a city glitters at night. Skyscrapers pierce the sky, lights reflecting in glass like constellations of wealth. Inside those towers, fortunes are made and multiplied. Meanwhile, below, streets stretch long and dark, neighborhoods where opportunity feels distant, almost mythical. This is the landscape of modern America, a land of abundance and scarcity, of promise and illusion, of opportunity, but only for some. Inequality is not a new phenomenon. But in the United States, it has reached unprecedented extremes. The wealthiest 1% now controls nearly half of all national assets, while millions struggle just to keep their families fed and sheltered. A growing divide has replaced the post-war promise of shared prosperity. But inequality is not only about numbers. It is about perception. The American dream, once a vision of attainable mobility, is now largely a story, a narrative sold to the hopeful. Children are told that if they study hard, work diligently, and persevere, they will rise. And yet, statistical reality paints a different picture. A child born in 1980 to middle-class parents had roughly a 90% chance of earning more than their parents. Today, that chance has dropped dramatically. Economic mobility is stagnant. For many, hard work no longer guarantees upward movement, it guarantees struggle, endurance, and risk. The illusion of opportunity masks the reality of systemic barriers. Education, once the great equalizer, now mirrors inequality. Public schools are funded largely through property taxes, meaning children in wealthier neighborhoods receive more resources, better teachers, and advanced programs. Children in struggling communities inherit underfunded schools, overcrowded classrooms, and limited access to higher education. Opportunity, it seems, has an address. Meanwhile, healthcare reinforces the divide. A serious illness can ruin a family, wiping out savings and plunging them into debt, while the wealthy navigate medical crises with ease. In many ways, society tells families, try harder. Work smarter. But remember, the system is not built for you. Even the labor market reflects this imbalance. Secure, high-paying jobs with benefits have disappeared. Middle-class work has been replaced by low-wage, precarious employment. Gig economy jobs offer flexibility but no security. Corporate consolidation ensures that profits rise while wages stagnate. The illusion is pervasive, opportunities exist, if only one is willing to chase them. But chasing is rarely enough. And the psychological toll is profound. Sociologists note that inequality erodes trust, fuels resentment, and fosters a sense of injustice. When people perceive that the game is rigged, motivation erodes, communities fracture, and social cohesion weakens. America's middle class does not just shrink economically, it frays morally, socially, emotionally. Wealth concentration also alters politics. Campaign financing, lobbying, and policy decisions increasingly reflect the interests of the affluent, while struggling families are marginalized, their needs sidelined. The system, meant to serve the public, now rewards those who already have. The very rules of opportunity are skewed in favor of the wealthy. But the illusion is maintained. Media, advertising, and popular culture celebrate success stories, athletes, entrepreneurs, tech billionaires. These tales suggest mobility is attainable, that hard work is sufficient. Yet for every story of meteoric rise, thousands experience stagnation, or worse, decline. These success stories are exceptions, not templates. They reinforce the myth: if you fail, it must be personal, not systemic. In this environment, families continue to borrow, to stretch, to hope. Parents invest in costly extracurriculars, believing it will secure their children's future. Students take on enormous student loans, believing that debt is the price of advancement. Home buyers take on mortgages beyond their means, believing that property equals security. Each act is rational, human, understandable, but increasingly futile. The middle class is trapped in a paradox: the system encourages them to strive, yet constrains their ability to succeed. Opportunity exists, but often only for those already near the top. The ladder is there, but it is missing rungs, warped by policy, by economics, by culture. Anthropologists describe this as a society of dual realities. One reality is abundance, luxury, and security for a privileged few. The other is precarity, struggle, and constant risk for the majority. Americans see the former and believe they can reach it, while the latter defines the daily experience of most families. This tension shapes not just economics, but identity, values, and national psyche. The consequences are subtle and profound. Communities grow more segregated, as families chase access to better schools, safer neighborhoods, and job opportunities. Political polarization intensifies, fueled by resentment and perceived unfairness. Mental health crises escalate, as the constant pressure to compete, survive, and ascend takes a toll on the mind and body. And yet, hope persists. It is human nature to believe in possibility, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Families continue to work, to sacrifice, to invest in futures that may never materialize. This hope is both beautiful and tragic. It drives perseverance, but it also prolongs struggle. Ultimately, inequality and the illusion of opportunity are two sides of the same coin. Without awareness of systemic imbalance, society treats failure as personal. And while families endure, they do so under pressure, anxiety, and exhaustion. In the next chapter, we will explore the new forms of work and wealth, the gig economy, tech disruption, and precarious employment that have reshaped the American middle class. How does one survive, and what does survival cost when stability is a relic of the past? Dawn breaks over a city that never sleeps. The streets are alive, but not with the hum of factories or the rhythm of predictable 9-to-5 jobs. Instead, the air vibrates with the digital pulse of an economy unmoored, ride-sharing apps pinging, delivery drivers weaving through traffic, warehouses buzzing with temporary labor. Welcome to the new labor landscape of America, a world where stability has vanished and the middle class survives on precarious lives. Once, employment meant security. Jobs provided wages, benefits, and a sense of purpose. But the 21st century economy tells a different story. Automation has replaced human hands with machines. Outsourcing has moved production overseas. Corporations have restructured, cutting costs and shifting risk to workers. The traditional middle-class job, a foundation for families, communities, and identity, has eroded. Gig work, contract labor, temporary positions, these are the new norms. Companies celebrate flexibility, framing it as opportunity. Ride-share drivers, freelance creatives, delivery workers, temp staff, all hailed as pioneers of freedom. But freedom comes with a price: unpredictability, instability, lack of benefits, absence of protections. In the new labor market, no paycheck is guaranteed, no healthcare is provided, no retirement assured. Consider Jessica, a single mother in Los Angeles. She drives for a rideshare service during the day, packs orders at a warehouse at night. Her schedule shifts weekly, dictated by algorithms she cannot control. She earns enough to pay the rent, barely. But what happens if her car breaks down? What if she falls sick? There is no safety net. The system calls it entrepreneurial opportunity, she calls it survival. And this is not an isolated story. Across the nation, millions exist in this liminal space between work and insecurity. They are employed, but vulnerable. They are productive, but precarious. They pay taxes, participate in society, yet remain perpetually exposed to financial shocks. The psychological toll is enormous. Sociologists describe a phenomenon called precarity anxiety, a constant stress born from uncertainty. Workers experience higher rates of depression, insomnia, and chronic stress. Families struggle to plan for the future, because the future itself is unstable. Even simple choices, buying groceries, paying rent, or planning a vacation, become exercises in tension and compromise. And yet, many cling to hope. They believe if they work harder, take more gigs, optimize schedules, they can achieve stability. But the system rarely rewards effort alone. Algorithms dictate hours, corporations dictate pay, and markets dictate opportunity. Hard work exists, but security does not. The ladder of mobility has been replaced with a treadmill, fast-moving, exhausting, and going nowhere. Technology exacerbates the inequality. Those with advanced skills thrive in a knowledge-based economy, often remote, flexible, highly paid. Those without, relegated to low-wage labor, face relentless pressure. The result, a two-tier workforce. One thrives in freedom, the other survives in precarity. Education, once a path to stability, is now a gamble. College debt pushes graduates into gig work, as traditional entry-level jobs vanish. And even those with degrees often face underemployment, skills acquired, but wages and opportunities insufficient. The middle class, already fragile, finds itself squeezed from both ends. Healthcare compounds the problem. Precarious workers often lack insurance. A single emergency can wipe out months of earnings. Families must choose, pay rent or seek treatment. These are not stories of irresponsibility, they are systemic failures, the cost of an economy that shifted risk from employers to individuals. And yet, culture glorifies hustle. Social media celebrates productivity, side gigs, passive income, and entrepreneurship. Failure is framed as a personal flaw rather than a structural reality. The narrative tells Americans to work harder, optimize more, and adapt continuously, ignoring the fact that the system is designed to keep them struggling. The human cost is deep. Families postpone marriage. They delay children. They downsize dreams. Childhoods are shaped by parental stress. Mental health declines. Communities lose cohesion as residents work long, unpredictable hours. The stability once associated with middle-class life, homeownership, consistent education, secure retirement, is increasingly unattainable. Economists warn this new labor structure is reshaping society. The gig economy is efficient, profitable, flexible, but it extracts security from workers while concentrating wealth at the top. The middle class, once the backbone of American prosperity, is now structurally fragile. Its survival depends not on collective stability, but on individual endurance. And yet, even amid precarity, Americans adapt. They innovate. They find new ways to survive. Informal economies emerge. Families share resources, barter, and collaborate. Hope persists, not because the system guarantees it, but because humanity persists. But the persistence is costly. It comes with fatigue, anxiety, deferred dreams, postponed retirement, and a constant specter of crisis. The new labor does not just reshape the economy, it reshapes identity. Who is middle class in America today? Not the secure homeowner of decades past. Not the factory worker with pension and benefits. Instead, the middle class is defined by endurance, adaptability, and risk management, a precarious tightrope walk suspended over uncertainty. As night falls over the city, drivers return their rented cars, warehouse workers punch out, freelancers close laptops. The streets quiet, but the tension lingers. Tomorrow, it begins again. The middle class survives, but it survives precariously. And the consequences extend beyond families. Precarity transforms politics, community structures, consumer behavior, and even national morale. A society built on instability is a society at risk of fragmentation. In the next chapter, we examine how this new reality affects retirement, savings, and the illusion of security, the final frontier of the vanishing middle class. How do Americans plan for a future that no longer feels possible? The camera drifts over a quiet suburban street at twilight. Mailboxes stand in neat rows. The houses are silent, empty, their owners inside, sitting alone at kitchen tables or recliners. Pensions, once reliable, are gone. Savings, once secure, are threatened. Retirement, a stage of life that should be restful, is now shrouded in uncertainty. For decades, the American middle class relied on a simple promise: work hard, save, and eventually retire comfortably. Pensions, Social Security, stable jobs, these formed the foundation of security. Retirees could imagine a life of leisure, travel, family, and reflection. They could plan for the future because stability was baked into the system. But that system has changed. Pensions have largely disappeared, replaced by 401(k)s and IRA plans, investments tied directly to volatile markets. The risk of financial ruin has shifted from corporations and institutions to individuals, leaving millions exposed to economic swings beyond their control. Consider Margaret, a former administrative assistant in Ohio. She contributed faithfully to her 401(k) for 30 years. When the market crashed, she lost nearly half her savings. Now, at 64, she cannot retire. She works part-time in a local grocery store, hoping to make ends meet. She is not alone. Millions face similar crises, their retirement dreams deferred indefinitely. The shift from pensions to self-directed retirement accounts has created a stark inequality. Those with financial literacy, access to investment advice, and steady incomes navigate the system. Those without, often the very middle-class workers who once relied on predictable paychecks, struggle. They must learn, adapt, and plan, often too late, while market volatility erodes their security. Healthcare is another looming threat. Retirees increasingly face medical costs that far exceed what they can afford. Prescription drugs, long-term care, insurance premiums, expenses that once seemed manageable now consume decades of savings. The very safety net that retirement promised has become a source of anxiety. And yet, cultural narratives continue to glorify financial independence. Retirement planning seminars, glossy investment ads, social media influencers selling wealth wisdom all reinforce the idea that individuals can secure their future with discipline and foresight. But discipline alone cannot overcome systemic risk, economic inequality, or rising costs. Hope, it seems, has been privatized. Demographers warn of a looming crisis. Baby boomers entering retirement face unprecedented uncertainty. Many continue to work past traditional retirement age, not by choice, but necessity. A significant portion of Americans over 65 cannot cover basic living expenses. Retirement, once a hallmark of middle-class stability, is increasingly a dream deferred. The psychological toll is profound. Anxiety about money persists into old age. The pride of independence is replaced by fear of dependency. Families feel strain as adult children often must support aging parents. Social cohesion frays as retirees navigate a system that promises freedom but delivers insecurity. And yet, some resilience emerges. Communities rally. Neighbors help neighbors. Part-time work, freelancing, volunteering, all become ways to survive and maintain purpose. Retirees adapt, reinvent themselves, find new meaning. But the adaptation is rarely comfortable. It is survival, not abundance. Financial planners call this the retirement paradox, a population that works longer, saves diligently, and still cannot secure stability. A paradox that illuminates the vulnerability of a middle class built on borrowed time, precarious labor, and systemic shifts. Socially, the consequences are broader. Retirees delay spending, impacting the economy. Young families inherit fewer resources. Intergenerational tension grows. Society, once sustained by the confidence of a secure older generation, now feels the strain of uncertainty, fear, and deferred expectations. Consider the cities that relied on middle-class retirees to sustain local economies: Florida's retirement communities, Arizona's suburbs, Midwest towns. As insecurity spreads, these areas face not just economic challenges, but social challenges. Volunteerism declines, civic engagement wanes, local businesses shutter. The middle-class safety net that once held communities together is unraveling. And this unraveling is both visible and invisible. It is visible in the statistics: rising elder poverty, delayed retirements, depleted savings. But it is invisible in kitchens, bedrooms, and living rooms, where quiet fear persists. Parents hide worry from children. Couples sit in silence over mounting bills. Seniors mask anxiety behind smiles and social outings. The vanishing middle-class retirement is not just an economic story. It is a human story, a story of dreams deferred, dignity eroded, and futures rewritten. It reveals the fragility of a system that shifted risk to individuals while promising stability. And it forces a question: how does a society function when the people who built it cannot trust that their later years will be secure? The answer, in part, lies in adaptation, but adaptation is costly. Families reduce consumption. Communities fragment. Mental and physical health decline. The promise of leisure, reflection, and fulfillment, the hallmark of a full life, is replaced by anxiety, compromise, and continued labor. And yet, despite everything, hope persists. Retirees find creative ways to survive, to maintain purpose, to preserve dignity. They volunteer, mentor, work part-time, or embrace new careers. Humanity endures. But endurance is not abundance. It is not prosperity. It is survival. The middle class, once defined by stability, predictability, and security, now finds its most vulnerable stage, retirement, marked by uncertainty. The promise of a safe and comfortable later life has faded, leaving many to navigate the shadows of economic, social, and psychological risk. In the final chapter, we examine the future, the trajectory of the vanishing middle class, the lessons learned, and the potential paths forward. What does it mean for America if the middle class continues to erode? And how might the nation reclaim balance, dignity, and stability? The sun rises over an American city, hazy and quiet. Streets stretch like veins, connecting neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and homes. But underneath the surface lies a fragile reality, a middle class no longer secure, no longer guaranteed, and no longer certain of its future. What comes next is uncertain, and yet, the trajectory is already visible. Economists and sociologists warn that if current trends persist, the middle class may continue to shrink, leaving behind a nation divided by wealth, opportunity, and security. Jobs that once formed the backbone of society, manufacturing, steady public service, entry-level corporate work, have eroded. Wages stagnate, debt rises, and retirement security wanes. The ladder of mobility has been destabilized. Yet, there are paths forward, faint but real. Some communities are adapting, experimenting with cooperative enterprises, local investment, and skill retraining programs. Technology offers new opportunities, but only for those who can access it. The challenge is systemic. Without structural reforms in wages, education, healthcare, and labor protections, the middle class will struggle to survive. At the individual level, families continue to endure and innovate. Parents leverage multiple income streams. Communities create informal safety nets. Retirees embrace flexible careers. The human spirit adapts, but adaptation is not the same as security. Survival alone does not restore the dignity, pride, and stability the middle class once provided. Meanwhile, wealth concentration continues. The ultra-wealthy benefit from technological disruption, capital gains, and globalization, accumulating resources at unprecedented rates. Social inequality deepens. Opportunities, once widely accessible, now cluster in elite enclaves. The illusion of meritocracy persists, while structural barriers remain. And yet, the future is not predetermined. Policy decisions, societal priorities, and collective action can reshape the trajectory. Education reform, wage adjustments, labor protections, and healthcare security can stabilize families. Communities can invest in resilience, cooperation, and equity. The story of the middle class is not merely one of decline, it is a story of choices yet to be made. Culturally, the middle class must redefine itself. The dream of stability may no longer be guaranteed by a factory job or pension, but it can still exist through innovation, solidarity, and social reform. Families may need to adapt, yes, but society can also evolve to support them. A nation that values its middle class ensures that opportunity, dignity, and security are not privileges, but rights. Psychologically, the challenge is profound. Millions of Americans have internalized the fragility of their economic reality. Anxiety, fear, and uncertainty shape identity and decision-making. Rebuilding trust in institutions, communities, and the promise of fairness, is as important as financial reform. Without it, policy alone cannot restore confidence or cohesion. Historically, the middle class has been the engine of democracy, stability, and innovation. Its erosion threatens not only individual families, but civic life itself. Participation, volunteerism, and community engagement all decline when survival dominates daily life. A society without a robust middle class risks polarization, fragmentation, and disengagement. Yet the story is also human. Families adapt, persevere, and find meaning in resilience. Communities innovate. Educators, activists, and policymakers work to bridge gaps. These efforts, small but significant, illuminate the possibility of a revitalized middle class. The future depends not on inevitability, but on collective action, social responsibility, and political will. Consider a family in a reinvented Rust Belt town. The father runs a cooperative workshop. The mother teaches online courses. Children attend schools enriched by community programs. Local businesses thrive through collective investment. The city is far from perfect, but the middle-class dream, stability, dignity, and opportunity, is being reclaimed, one neighborhood at a time. The lesson is clear: the vanishing middle class is not only a tragedy, it is also a warning. It shows the fragility of systems built without fairness, the human cost of unchecked inequality, and the consequences of deferred responsibility. But it also shows the power of adaptation, creativity, and collective effort. As night falls, the camera pans across rooftops, streets, and glowing windows. Families sleep, work, hope. The middle class is fragile, but it is not gone. It exists in effort, endurance, and imagination. Its survival, and revival, depends on both individual courage and societal choices. The final question lingers: will America allow the middle class to vanish completely? Or will it choose to rebuild, restore, and preserve the foundation of its democracy, economy, and identity? In the quiet, the answer is not yet written. But the story of resilience, adaptation, and struggle, continues. The camera drifts over the country, from the skyscrapers of New York City to the empty streets of former factory towns, from suburban cul-de-sacs to rural towns quietly fading into memory. The lights shimmer, the wind whispers through trees, the streets hum with the echoes of lives lived, dreams pursued, and struggles endured. The story of America's middle class is not just a story of money. It is a story of identity, of dignity, of what it means to belong. For decades, the middle class represented stability, progress, and hope. It was the heartbeat of communities, the foundation of democracy, the promise that hard work would be rewarded. But as we have seen, that heartbeat has grown faint. The foundation has cracked. And the promise, once bright, now feels fragile. We began this journey in the suburbs, those polished streets where lawns glimmered under the sun, and the dream of a house with a yard seemed attainable. But beneath the surface, families struggled. Bills stacked high, hours stretched thin, anxieties hidden behind smiles. The suburban dream, once a symbol of progress, became a stage of silent struggle. Then we traveled to the factory towns, the engines of America's rise. We witnessed how their closure left scars not only on the economy, but on human lives. The sound of machines fell silent. Communities emptied. Pride turned to despair. The middle class, once grounded in labor and stability, found itself adrift. Credit cards, loans, and borrowed time replaced steady paychecks. The rise of finance created a system where survival depended on risk, debt, and hope. Families juggled bills, retirement plans, and education costs, all while navigating a world that increasingly rewarded wealth over work. The illusion of opportunity masked the harsh reality: the ladder to prosperity had missing rungs. We saw the human cost, the anxiety, the broken marriages, the invisible scars carried by children, the isolation felt by parents, the despair that lurks in kitchens and living rooms across the country. The middle class is not just an economic category, it is a network of humans, families, communities, dreams. And that network is fraying. Inequality stretches from corner offices to city streets, separating those who thrive from those who merely survive. The illusion of opportunity keeps hope alive, even as structural barriers deny its full realization. Precarious labor, gig work, and automation have transformed the very nature of employment. Retirement, once a horizon of peace, has become a landscape of uncertainty. And yet, amid the shadows, there is resilience. Humanity persists. Families adapt. Communities innovate. Retirees reinvent themselves. Workers juggle multiple jobs, finding meaning and identity in survival. It is a story of endurance, a reminder that even when systems fail, people continue to strive, to hope, to survive. But resilience alone is not enough. Survival cannot replace dignity. Adaptation cannot substitute for security. And hope, when stretched thin, is fragile. The documentary we have shared is not just a reflection on decline, it is a call to awareness. To recognize the fragility of the middle class is to recognize the fragility of society itself. The middle class is the bridge between wealth and poverty, power and vulnerability, stability and chaos. When it falters, communities fracture, economies slow, democracies weaken. The vanishing middle class is not a distant story, it is here, unfolding in real time, in real families, in real lives. But the story does not end in despair. Every chapter we have explored, from suburbs to factory towns, from debt-laden households to retirees navigating uncertainty, reveals both struggle and possibility. Because even in the face of systemic failure, humans create solutions. Communities organize. Families innovate. Movements rise. Policy reforms can restore balance. Structural change can rebuild the ladder. And so, the question we leave with is both simple and profound: what will America choose? Will the middle class continue to erode, leaving a society fractured, anxious, and divided? Or will the nation take deliberate action to restore opportunity, ensure dignity, and rebuild stability, not for the wealthy few, but for all? This choice is reflected not only in policy, but in culture, in priorities, in the stories we tell ourselves. It is reflected in how we treat work, education, healthcare, and community. It is reflected in how we measure success, by wealth alone, or by stability, dignity, and opportunity for all. The future of the middle class is intertwined with the future of America itself. It is the difference between a society where hope is earned and sustained, and one where survival is a daily struggle, and dreams are deferred indefinitely. It is the difference between resilience alone, and resilience paired with justice. We have walked through the hidden truths, the untold stories, the shadows of a vanishing dream. We have witnessed the fragility, the human cost, and the illusions that mask it. And yet, the story continues. It continues in kitchens and classrooms, in workshops and offices, in neighborhoods and city streets. It continues in the decisions made by policymakers, communities, and families. The middle class may be fragile, but it is not gone. Its future is not predetermined. It exists in the courage to endure, the creativity to adapt, and the collective will to rebuild. Every choice, every policy, every act of solidarity, every story shared, contributes to that future. And so, as the camera drifts over the quiet streets, the glowing windows, the children at play, the workers arriving home, the retirees reading quietly in their chairs, we are reminded, the middle class is not just an economic concept. It is life itself. It is dignity, hope, and possibility. And while its foundation may tremble, its heart still beats in millions of Americans who strive, persevere, and dream. The vanishing middle class is a warning, a reflection, and a challenge. It is a story of fragility and resilience, of struggle and hope, of collapse and potential renewal. It asks us to see, to act, and to imagine a future where opportunity is real, security is restored, and dignity is preserved. Because the future of the middle class is more than numbers, more than policy, more than work or debt. It is the story of who we are as a nation, how we care for each other, and whether we choose a society where dreams are possible, not just for the few, but for all. The story is not finished. Its next chapter is being written now, in every home, every classroom, every workplace, and every community. And the question remains, what role will each of us play in shaping that chapter? The camera rises, soaring over the nation, from east to west, north to south. Cities glimmer, towns breathe, fields stretch wide. Somewhere, a family sits at dinner, discussing bills. Somewhere, a retired worker walks through a quiet street. Somewhere, a child dreams of the future. The middle class persists, fragile but alive, waiting, like the dawn, to see what tomorrow brings.